Rabosai, we're up to Rav Ashi on Daf Peiches Amid Beis in the middle of the Amud. Let me just find the place here. Just 1 second. Yeah. So you'll see in the middle of Peiches Amid Beis, the line start getting wider. We're on the third of the wide lines. Rav Ashi Omer, Milo Teitze Dekama Rav. Rav says that if you have a situation of treu trey, so two Adam say that we saw her husband dead, and two Adam say we saw her husband alive. She went ahead and got married. Rav says lo teitze. We're not going to break up the marriage to that second partner. Lo teitze me'atera harichon. In other words, we were matir ha lebaila. Why? Because the achar shechazer baila harishon, the yotze is mi baila sheni yichol loshuv lebaila harishon. Wow. So according to Rav Ashi, in this case, she's allowed to get remarried to her first husband. Normally, when a marriage terminates, then if the woman gets married to another man, she can no longer marry her original first husband. So a man divorces his wife, for example, he should know that if she gets married to another man, he will never, ever be able to remarry. That get is final. However, here's the exception to the rule. In a case where two Adam testify that he was dead, she married someone else. Now he shows up and he's still alive. She needs a get from the second husband, that's midrabanan, and he can retake his wife. And that's called lo teitze me'atera harishon. And atera harishon, which means from the fact that when he originally married her, I'm talking about the first husband, we'll call him Reuven and Shimon. When Reuven married her, obviously she had a heter. She was allowed to be married to him. There was nothing problematic about the marriage relationship. That heter that we gave her by validating her marriage to Reuven will continue, says Rav, even after she marries Shimon. Normally, if a woman gets married to another man or has a relationship with another man, she can never go back to her first husband. But here she can go back to her first husband, lo teitze me'atera harishon. So again, if she got married based on the testimony of one witness, that's when our Mishnah says that we impose a penalty. And if her husband shows up and he's alive and well, she's going to have to be divorced both from her first husband and from her second husband. She can never get married to either one of these two men. That's in the case of Eid Echad, to testify that her husband died. But if there are two Eidim that testified that her husband died, then she doesn't lose or forfeit her rights to be remarried by her first husband. Why? Because she relied on two valid witnesses that testified that her husband died, and she doesn't deserve any penalty whatsoever. We may require that the second husband deliver a get, because otherwise it looks like she's going out of a marriage without a get. But once she receives the get, she can go back to her first husband. Lo teitze me'atera harishon. I mean, could you just imagine? This is the way my mind works. In the Holocaust, two men come along and tell her that her husband died. We saw him going into the chambers. She gets married to another man. I mean, this is what went on in the DP camps when they took testimony, and then she got married to someone else. Lo and behold, her first husband is alive. Either the Ada made a mistake, I don't know what happened exactly, but she's still alive. So Rav says she'll need to get from her second husband. Again, husband in Merchaot Kfulot, she's not really married to him. And she goes back to her first husband. Yechola Loshem L'Baila Rishon. That's called Loteitze Be'atera Rishon. The Gemara is not happy with Rav Ashi. Ha'amar Rav Chadazimna. Disnan. Let's just read the Mishnah. That according to Rav Shimon Nises, there were two Eidim that testified that her husband died and she got married. Shalobershus, meaning she didn't get a license from Bezdin to get married. She doesn't need a license from Bezdin because once there are two witnesses that testify that her husband's dead, she can go and get married to someone else. Now her first husband is alive and well. He comes back. Is Muteris Lachsa. The Amar of Hun Amar Rav Hachi Hilchasa. And the Gemara answers Chada Mechlal Chavatay. So the amazing thing is that the Gemara is absolutely convinced that in the case where she relied on the testimony of two witnesses to the effect that her husband died, there's no reason to suspect that they're perjuring themselves or they're lying under oath. And she got married to someone else. She can go back to her first husband if he's still alive because these Eidim did not tell the truth, whether deliberately or by mistake. And the only reason Rav is quoted twice to repeat the same principle is only because of Chada Michlal de Charatayt. In other words, they didn't hear it explicitly from Rav, but they derived it from context. Omar Shmuel. Now the Mishnah has established that in a case where there was one witness who testified that her husband died, and she got married to another husband based on the testimony of one witness, if her husband shows up alive, then Teitzi Mizeh Umizeh, she can no longer marry to this one or to that one. Over Shmuel Lo Shanu Ela Shalom Makchashto. Aval Makchashto Lo Teitzi. Now, we don't know exactly the case of Shmuel, but let's just say the words of Shmuel. And then we'll see how the Gemara is going to analyze the words of Shmuel and what exactly is the scenario that he's talking. But at least the literal translation is that when supposedly our husband comes back alive and two witnesses testify, oh, there he is, there's your husband. He says nothing. But if she opens up her big mouth, so to speak, and she says, they're lying, my husband is gone, and this imposter, that's not my husband, lotates it. We can validate the marriage to the second husband. So the Gemara immediately asks, who cares whether she's machich or not machich? We've got Aiden that testify he's a lot. For my askinon, Elema bebeitrei. If we're going to assume that there are two witnesses that testify that our husband is alive, is kima kashtale my hobby? What right, what status does she have to deny and contradict the testimony of two witnesses? And why would Shmuel say lo teitza? Ella, by possible elimination, we're talking about Bechat. We only have one witness to testify that her husband is alive. And Shmuel says, now at the ball in Hakor, does she deny and contradict the testimony of that one single aide? And if she does, and she says he's lying, then lo teitza. Or shaska, if she says nothing, and one aide testifies that her husband's alive, teitza. Again, she has one aide that testifies that her husband died. But when one aide testifies your husband's alive and she was silent, then tacitly she's admitting that her husband is still alive. So the Gemara asks, in this case where she was quiet and she didn't contradict the aide who testifies that her husband's alive, what if she did not contradict him? Then teitze. Amar Ula, this contradicts the principle of Ula. Let's just think about this for a minute before we read the Gemara. If she contradicts the aide and she has one witness to support her claim that her husband is indeed gone, then lo teitze. But in the case of Shaska, then teitze, even though she has a witness to support her, and he testifies that Mace Baila. Now, when the first witness came into Bezin and testified that her husband's dead, Bezin allowed her to get married. How is that so? I mean, after all, she's an Ashes Ish. One aid should not be sufficient. And the only answer we could give is that the Torah elevated the status of one aid and made him into two aidim. That's the magic of it. So the mechanics of it is that when the aid testifies Mace Baila, she can get married because this aid is considered like two aidim. Now, if that be the case, when another witness comes in and says he's still alive, we saw him, then he's an Eid Echad b'makom shnayim. He's actually contradicting two witnesses. When one witness contradicts two witnesses, we throw out that one witness. It's worthless. One witness cannot contradict two witnesses. So forget about Shosekis. What are you making a big deal about the fact that she was silent? Even if she wasn't silent, it would make no difference. No, I'm sorry. Let me say it better than that. In the case that she's silent, then Shmuel says that, why? Even if she shows seconds, she really has the power, the gav, of two witnesses supporting her claim that her husband died. And that's the statement of Ula. Therefore, when one aide comes to testify that her husband died, we believe him as if he were two aided. Now another aide comes in, he says, no, her husband is alive. Is ein varchal echad b'makom shnayim. We already elevated the status of the first aide who testified that her husband died to the status of two aided. We're not going to allow you to grab on and get a status upgrade such that you can contradict two aided by saying lo meis baila. So now we're in a bind. We don't understand Shmuel in his ruling in a case where she was silent when a witness came in to testify that her husband's alive. And Shmuel says in that case, since she was silent, is Teitzeh. Why Teitzeh? Based on the testimony of one witness that her husband's alive, we've already accepted virtually two witnesses that her husband died, based on the principle of Ula. So that witness that testifies that her husband is alive does not have the power to contradict that witness that testified that her husband died, because that witness that testified that her husband died has been upgraded to the status of two Eidim. So now the Gemara tries to clarify the statement of Shmuel. When does Shmuel say that if she contradicts the aid, then lo teitze, but if she's silent, teitze, v'psule edus, uke Rabbi Nehemiah. What happens if you have a witness who under normal circumstances would be believed, and Ula upgrades his status to that of Shnayim, but it happens to be that that aide who testified that her husband died was an aide puzzle. He is not believed in a Jewish court of law. His status, his potential status as a witness has been negated, has been canceled. So let's say, for example, one aide testifies Mace Baila, and Ula would say that he's believed like Shnai. The Torah believes him as if he were two witnesses. Now, you have Psule Edus that testifies, no, her husband is alive. So Shmuel says, just 1 second, let me get this straight. So now we have psule edus that are technically disqualified for testimony, and they're contradicting the first original witness who testifies Meis Baila. Comes along Shmuel, and he says, we should be makabel the edus of psulim, and this is based on Rab Nechemia. So now we're going to begin to, hopefully, we'll begin to understand the distinction here between shosekes and makreshes. So what did Rab Nechemia say? We don't know. Right now we don't know. The Gemara is going to pick it up in just a minute. But what we do know is that if she's not makrish, she doesn't contradict their testimony, then they're believed. Imagine we have psuli edus testifying that her husband is alive. If she's makrish them, and she says that guy that you identify as my husband is not my husband, so in effect, what she does through her hakasha is that she negates any halachic status to these psulim. But if she's not makrish, then they become ne'emanim to testify that this, in fact, is her husband. I mean, again, on a very technical level, it sounds like what the Gemara is saying is that for these psuli edus to qualify to testify in a Jewish court of law, what we need is her approval. She has to, so to speak, agree with them, or at least tacitly agree with them. But she has a veto power in her back pocket, if she uses it, and she could say, they are lying. I know my husband is dead. So again, you have psuli edus that are testifying that this is her husband, that he's alive. They are contradicting the original aid. There was only one witness who testified that I saw his kaput. He was dead. So now we have a stira, a contradiction between psuli edus and one single aid kosher. So Shmuel is making a groundbreaking chidush here. He's breaking new ground. He's saying we're going to rely on the testimony of psuli edus, two witnesses, let's say, who are technically disqualified for testimony will qualify them, will upgrade their status, accept their aidus against the one aid who's an aid kosher, who testifies that I saw her husband dead. Says the Gemara, according to Shmuel, by Medvar Mamurim, when do we upgrade the status of Psuliedus who testify that our husband is dead? And we accept them as if they were two witnesses, two kosher witnesses that qualify as testimony. That's only if she is a shosekes. She says nothing. But if she's makcheshes, then we're not going to rely on the testimony of Psuliedus. Then he's believed. And therefore she doesn't have to bust up the second marriage. He writes here, Ein psuli edus ne'emanim lahoid al adam kosher va'afilu hem elef. Evan she'adam neman al atzmo be'isurim. So why is there the joker card here? The unexplained piece of the puzzle is that her, I don't know, I'm using a term, veto power. She has the cards in her pocket. She will decide whether or not to believe these psuliedus. If she decides to contradict them, then they're out. They're out of here. They're psulim. And if we don't have their testimony to the effect that her husband's alive to contradict the Eid Echad who testifies that her husband died, then lo teitze, she can remain married. But if she shows sekes when the psuliedus come in, then the psuliedus will override the testimony of the one single aid. And we're going to believe the psuliedus to the effect that her husband is alive and well. Now, what's going to ensue now is an analysis of this principle, which is based on Rabbi Nehemiah, of whether or not we could believe psuliedus and why that's dependent upon shosekes or makreshes. So then in Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to have to analyze that question. But again, the general framework we have one aid who's kosher testifying that her husband died. We have two aidim psulim that are technically excluded, disqualified for testimony, and they testify that we know our husband's alive. And what do we do in this case? How do we proceed? Do we believe the one aid against the psulim, or do we believe the psulim because they're two against one aid? And the answer is, it all depends on whether she's makreshes or shosekes. If she shosekes, then we're going to believe and make reliable testimony out of the two psuliedus against the one aid who's kosher. If on the other hand, she is makreshes, then we don't believe the psuliedus. We're going to believe the aid kosher, the aid echad, and imnises lo teitze. Why? Why does it all boil down to the question of whether she's shosekes or makreshes? He says, "Im lo haya ba'al Ve'ed echad haya omer meis, u'shnayim omer lo meis, v'chein im haya ba baal, ve'ed echad haya omer shemeis habal, v'zeh eino baila, u'shnei edim omer zeh baila, ve'hi haisa omeres eini yodas. I don't know. Is this my husband? Is it not my husband? So this is dependent upon our sugya of Shmuel Makreshes or Shosekes. Okay, then Rabbosai, this is where we're going to stop for now. And we are going to emphasize this point of Rov Deos. What does this concept of Rov Deos mean? Shmuel is saying that in the case where one aide testified Mace Baila, he could be contradicted by Psuli Eidos. Why? Because the Torah doesn't really rely on one aide. One aide is believed b'Toras Nemonis, not b'Toras Eidus. And now we have two aidim who are not aidim because they're Psuli Eidus, they're Krovim, maybe Nashim, but they are believed b'Toras Nemonis. And we have one Nemonis against another Nemonis, we're going to tip the scale in favor of the Rov. And therefore, let's say there were two witnesses who are technically disqualified, and they testify that the Baal is alive and well against the testimony of one aide who says that the Baal is mace, and we believe the psulim against the Eid Echad and in Niseis Teitze. But that's only, says Shmuel, in a case of Chosekes. But in the case of Makreshes, then she's believed even against Rov Deos, even against these two psulim who are in the majority here against the one aide who says Meis Baila. She doesn't have to go out of her second husband because ein psule edus ne'emanim lahoid aladum kosher. Psule edus cannot testify against a person who has a cheskes kashrus. He's a reliable person. Afiluhem elef, no matter how many they are. Kevan she'adam ne'eman alatzmo b'isurim b'davar habarer lo, in something which is clear to him. And she's saying clearly, I know that my husband died. So again, im lo hayabah habal. If no one saw the Baal and he's not around, nobody's pointing to him and saying that's your husband, then Eid Echad, who says mace, then he's believed. And in this case, Rashi adds another element into the equation. Rashi says that umachzekes eishes ish, umecheskes eishes ish, yotzesolah al pia rishon. It sounds like the cheskes eishes ish is completely undermined because of the first aid, even in the light of Rov Deos against the aid who say that her husband is alive. Now, we thought that the reason why, according to Shmuel, lo teitze is because of her ne'emanis al atzmo, but Rashi is indicating that there's ne'emanis to the Eid Echad. Hikshu achronim, madua yesh tzorach bi eidus eid rishon. Why do we need the first aid? Hare mikoach tainus ha'isha levad yesh la mina neged rov psulim. If psulim are not eidim, and they cannot testify against the person, Adam Kosher, who's Neman al Atmo, Isurim, if it's a Dover Barolo, then the very fact that she's Makreshes, that itself is a Dover Barer and Adam Neman al Atmo against Edim Sulim. Why does Rashi have to introduce the Eid Echad, who testifies that Meis Baila? And there are those who want to say that Rashi Bibir Atam she'ena psul ne'monim neged tainis bari shala isha is that the psulim are not believed. This was without Rashi, against Rashi. They wouldn't be believed against the tainis bari of the isha. So let's take a look for a moment in the Yalkut Bi'urim second, the Yalkut Abiurim on Daf Echesam Beis. And here it appears on page Yud Aleph. The Pashtus Hasugya Nira, it would seem that Rabbi Nechemia, that the Gemara is quoting, Lo balachlok al divrei ula el lahosef al dvarav, shebemakom sheish rov deos afilu edim psulim nemonim gam neged eid echad shemin sator kishnayim. And Rab Chaim is quoted here from Hilchos Gerushin that af shebechol dine edus ein havdel beitrei lemeya v'lo nemar din rov deos be'edus isha nemar din nemonis miyuchad she'ena begeder edus v'lachein shaykh loma rov deos afilu shel edim psulim v'hem yo'ilu neged eid echad. Fine. Now, Rashi Mosif Micheskes Eishesish Yatza Isha Al Yidei Edus Ha'eda Rishon L'chein Lo Teitze V'Hiksha Achronim Adua Yesh Tzorch B'Edus Ed Rishon. This on page Yud Aleph, on the left column, the Dibra Masil Mosif Rashi. Are Mikoach Tainus Isha Levad Yesh La Mina Neged Rov Psulim Yesh Liyashev Shekol Ma Shemo Ila Tainus Bari Shel Ha'isha Neged Rov Psulim Hu Rak Mikevan Shekvar Niseis Al Pi Ha'ed. Only because she was married based on the testimony of one witness, Shomer Meis Baila. Varei Becheskes Heter Li Fanenu. Now she has a Cheskes Heter, and therefore she could be believed against Rov Deos, and we're not going to apply the principle of Rov Deos. Then he quotes the Beis Shmuel, Shetainas ha'isha irak she'ena makira es ha'ish hatoin shu baila. She doesn't recognize this man who presents himself as her husband. Ubazeh makchishas hapsulim hameidim negda. That's going to undermine the credibility of the psulim who testified that this is her husband. She knows this is not her husband. She has not yet convinced anybody, including herself, that her husband is dead. That he recognized the corpse of her husband, and therefore and therefore the Beit Shmuel concludes isha bibari shemeis baila. Not that she knows that this is not her husband, but she knows her husband's dead. Nemenis keneged rov psulim gam lelo edus eda rishon shemeis baila. So that's the very important discussion that we have here in the Yalkut Biur. So Mirza Hashem, tomorrow we'll pick it up from Disanya, Rabbi Nechemia Om. Thank you very much.